in banking and industrial sectors in Belgium, Canada, and the US, has been working internationally ever since, was working for Nestle, or actually with Nestle, until 1987, where he was in charge of marketing on various markets in Europe and Africa. He has been, ever since 1987, has been active in the finance industry and owns the Industrie- and Finanzkontor, which is a finance boutique and a fiduciary trust company in Lichtenstein. But he's also, most importantly, the chairman and founder of Geopolitical Information Services, which I highly recommend to you if you want to have real background information. And of course, he's the president of the European Center of Austrian Economics Foundation, based in Vaduz, Liechtenstein. Prince Michael, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Barbara. And I think, I hope you didn't promise too much, and I will try to live at least up 20% of what you promised about me. The most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. These were not the words of an anarchist or a person opposing the concept of the state in general. These were the words of the head of probably the largest government, the largest administration in the world, President Ronald Reagan. President Reagan saw very clearly that government should have limits and should leave most decisions to the free choice of free citizens. He followed the principle that the state should basically only do those things which only the state can do. This included the wisdom that people should know themselves what is good for them and are able to choose. It includes also as little intervention of the state in the economy as possible. These were, however, not policies which the successors of Ronald Reagan followed, nor most of the European governments or the supranational or global organizations. I want to thank the organizers and our hosts here that I can speak here. This is a big pleasure and an honor for me. Maybe before I start, I want to clarify one thing. I might talk about government or administration. I don't want to do a government or administration bashing. And I hold it here with words I heard once from Archduke Otto of Habsburg, who said, God bless our good civil servants, but beware us of the bureaucrats. Unfortunately, we see now in the global context, and that is my theme, is the planned economy our destiny, that not only the nanny state, a state who takes care of most of parts of our life, is gaining importance, but also a state which is controlling and limiting freedom. There is unfortunately an old principle. If you want the nanny state to do more for you, you pay for that with parts of your freedom. It is today frequently quoted that capitalism doesn't work anymore and therefore state intervention is necessary. And what is proposed now, a very undefined system of humanitarian socialism, I don't know whether it's humanitarian, and a feel-good collectivism. But the problem of capitalism is not actually that it does not work. It is that capitalism, or what we call the capitalist countries, have lost their liberal roots. And this leads us to the issue that we have more and more administrative planning and guiding of the economies in this so-called capitalist society. A good free economy, which is and was the basis of our prosperity, is based on principles such as personal responsibility, the willingness to incur risks by entrepreneurs, and the concept of competition, which is not necessarily a killing competition, but gives pressure for constant improvement. This should not only be in business, it should also go on a personal level of employees in the daily life, but also a competition between municipalities, between regions and states, a healthy competition. Unfortunately, we have tendencies which erode the principles of personal responsibility and the very positive principles of competition. We see on one side the very socialist concept of an elitarian administration which believes that they know best what is good for the citizens. What it also, and get importance by that, what it also means is that we are getting a system of control and a system of interventionism by government. In one of the conferences we had in Vaduz, Gottfried von Haberler conference, we had a theme when bureaucrats are playing entrepreneurs, with the only difference that they don't incur any personal risk. Another tendency, which is even more dangerous, is that more and more people and groups tend to ask the state to fix their problem. This allows an unlimited growth of the public administration and intervention by them. I think one of the problems, and for me it's a chicken and egg question, is that our Western society has become very, and especially the Europeans one, very risk averse. They don't want to have a risk. And they don't allow actually failure. But every new incentive, everything can fail. And little in the economy, if you want to start a business, etc., you get rarely a second chance. If you fail in Europe, you have a black cross next to your name, and it's very difficult to get a financing or to get support for another start. In the old Soviet system, the planned economy worked that all means of production were nationalized. Everybody basically worked for state or collective organizations, and the different entities got their targets from the government. People who set the targets were probably not people who knew business who did it, and set some targets quite arbitrarily. And the whole system was a system of serfdom, slavery, and an existence of people on a very low level. Certain outstanding achievements were, however, possible, but only based on force and not to the benefit of most parts of the population. For instance, the Soviet Union, they were the first one in space with the Sputnik, but it was not a sustainable question. However, the Soviet system had a much clearer situation of central planning than the way we are going to, because we have a more camouflage central planning, which goes. This planned economy, to which I see the world developing today, appears to be slightly more smiling, but the long-term effects might be quite similar. The idea to have politics, government, and administration in the cockpit of the economy prevails. It is true that this gives means and power to government. There are actually a few tendencies which help to guide, to contain, to lead the economy in a planning thing. There is one, as said, the administration, who wants to have a more thing. The second thing is the population or people who ask everything something goes wrong or don't want to incur risk. They ask to do it. And the third one, which might be even the most dangerous one, is a question of moral and moralizing, which is carried out by different NGOs, by pressure groups, etc. One talks about ethics, about morale, but it's sometimes a moralizing, which is very difficult to define. There's also the tobacco issue, but there might be also other ones. There are now groups who say, well, we should reduce the consumption of beef, etc., because there's a lot of methane gas coming out of the cows and it's not very effective. One of the big tools on the way to a planned economy are regulations. Certainly, certain regulations are necessary in order to avoid harm, but they make sense in the streets that you drive on the right side, because otherwise it would be chaos. But the density of regulations we are getting now into is a real jungle, which limits the free development of businesses and of innovation. The huge problem is that we start more and more to eliminate competition and to replace the competition with regulations. And these two strong regulations again tend to further oligopolies and make it difficult for new players to enter into the market. A striking thing is the financial industry. We say we don't want to have institutions which are a systemic risk, which are too big to fail, etc. But on the other hand, we set their regulations which are too costly for smaller entities and which makes the entrance into the market very difficult. Unfortunately, a good part of businesses likes this system because it makes life easier, protects them, and provides for them quite protected markets. You see that, for instance, in the pharmaceutical industry. And they are a big lobby organization. It is, however, to the detriment of innovation and the healthy, creative, and innovative incentive of competition. Certain management-driven companies also like the regulatory density as it reduces their responsibility. And huge new businesses are created just in regulatory areas which support the system of control of these regulations. Compliance is certainly necessary, but it has become out of dimension, and working in compliance is finally a non-productive work if it's all oversized. If we look at the big four accounting firms, how they developed, how they grew, they have an inherent conflict of interest. They advise the governments on legislations, and on the second thing, they check whether people adhere to legislation. And I see in Europe, actually, the biggest, in the taxation area, the biggest enemy, actually, of the taxpayers are not necessarily anymore the tax authorities, it's the tax advisors who are not interested to reduce it. I don't want to see that I was a very good tax advisor, so I don't want to I have also some friends who are tax advisors. But it's threatening to see the growth of advisory businesses working in the area of control and compliance, and to the detriment of other services, manufacturing activities, infrastructure, etc. It's a huge cost for the economy. Unfortunately, the regulatory density and the wish of control of governments is not limited to the national level. It goes very strong on supranationals, such as the European Union, and even worse on the global level, because there is also no legitimacy. If we look at the G20 and the Doberman dog, the OECD, what did they institute? You know that they're all different countries, the G20. They hate also partially themselves. But they on one thing, they are always only to have more control on the citizens and more control on the economy. But the world economy will not grow because G20 has decided it. I just want to mention a few areas and also the underlying proposed arguments for overregulations. Regulations are very heavy in labor law and social law, distorting and making the labor market unflexible. It argued the case of job security and social justice, etc. Exaggerated labor law is, however, the main reason for the strong youth unemployment in certain European countries. The ridicule of the situation is that this too strong job protection is to the detriment of job creation. We find it in competition law and product classification. Here the main reason is consumer protection. It was just discussed before. I think you made a strong argument for that. Well, we need certain competition laws, but at present it allows the government to intervene very strongly and also make the entrance of new players in the market difficult. Consumer protection per se is okay, however, a too rigid specification limits competition by new developments. It's right that you have the right declaration on the packaging, but it should not be exaggerated what colors you can use and whatever. Probably the strongest tool to manipulate the economy are the tax laws. The underlying reason for taxes is that citizens and businesses pay for the necessary expenses of the public administration. For this, the public administration has to give the services to the people, which could be protection, internal and external security, police, legal system, etc. However, the big majority of all tax systems have become very complex machines in order, I would say, to manipulate the economies and to cater for certain pressure groups, for certain clientele groups. It gives the state a huge tool to plan the economy and also to collect votes with other people's money. The costs which this tax system creates and the uncertainty is staggering. There are terrible wastes which happen. There were sometimes, just for tax reasons, very stupid business decisions are taken. Taxes are not anymore a system where we acknowledge that we pay for services. They have partially become a threat. A main pillar for a prosperous society are property rights. Taxation and regulations are limiting these rights. The free use of your property can be heavily contained by regulations, and taxation has sometimes confiscatory effects. This guides the economy to the detriment of rule of law and incentive. What are the results of these interventions as opposed to free competition? The reason given for the regulations is to make the economy safer and more stable. It is certain that in a free economy, accidents happen. But it is enough variety in the economy that accidents should not become a general disaster. The density of regulations, however, will concentrate the risks even more. And if these regulations lead the economy in the wrong direction, the disaster will necessarily be much bigger. We've seen that, for instance, in the financial crisis, and I will come to that afterwards. Governments have, however, the possibility to delay disaster, but only on the price that the problem will become much bigger. We have seen that, for instance, in subsidies or protection for outdated technologies. It was something for a while, it was steel in Germany. We have now in Poland the issue of coal. And there are loads of examples. It led to disruption in regional areas and especially to a problem in the allocation of investments, causing bubbles, an area I also will concentrate on later. But we have seen in the labor law that the protection of the jobs leads to the unintended consequence that no new jobs are being created. Regulations are frequently created without that unintended consequences are taken in consideration, whether it's on purpose or short-sightedness or whatever. Another important thing for guiding the economy is the monetary policy. And governments always tend to control the monetary system. Also, in theory, central banks should be independent. Good monetary policy of responsible central banks should be to protect the value of money. Stable money is necessary for purpose of savings, but also to have reliable means of exchange. And money does need to have a price as any other product. An example of a very successful policy was for a long term the Deutsche Bundesbank and the German Mark. The Bundesbank really tried to stay independent of politics. The European Central Bank has, in theory, the same mission. And there was hope when it was created because there were so many member states that the European Central Bank would be really independent. Unfortunately, as well as the Fed in the US, the European Central Bank has now not only become the tool for planning the economy and also supporting fiscal policy, they even start to make fiscal policy themselves. They buy the debt of quite a few countries. And therefore the countries are not forced anymore to reform. The idea that one can, with a flood of cheap money, enhance consumption and with that grow the economy will only work very short term. It does work short term, but it doesn't solve the problem. It is now also a tool on the path to ever more planned and guided economy. Japan, Europe, and the US do it now for a long time with the result of eroding savings and creating huge bubbles. The subprime crisis of 2007 and 2008 had its roots less in greedy bankers, but in the policy of the US government to allow large consumer spending based on cheap money and unsecured credits. The regulatory system also allowed the financial system to further misuse these possibilities. They were backed, etc. When the bubble burst, the financial crisis started, but we haven't learned anything from it. Because money, which does not cost anything and which is abundant, will necessarily create waste and bubbles. Again, such a crisis will be fought by the same means that brought the crisis, more governments and more regulations. And we see now we have also a bubble now in the, for instance, in the equity markets. We have bubble in real estate, and just a question of time till these bubbles will burst. Money can be considered like a raw material. It should be precious. But what happens now? The monetary system is a typical case of having the unintended, but maybe even intended purpose of creating bubbles. The big role of government and interventions of the government in all parts of their life is limiting again and creates huge expenses. At the moment, we don't talk very much about the crisis of public debt, but it is there. And the remedy of the government is to control and squeeze the public even further. The result would be that the state will even more run the economy by limiting incomes, damaging property rights, and octroying a remuneration policy for the staff. Efficient reduction of debts is not more taxation, but less expenses. Very useful to further guide economies in this context is the inequality discussion. And here I'm coming to this issue of morale and moralizing. One of the big lip services for political parties of all colors is to create more equality, fight inequality. However, if we want to have a prospering, progressing society and economy, inequality is a certain price for it. Reducing inequality is a very popular slogan without people thinking what it means. Equality can only be achieved in a totalitarian system and not in a free society. Because it has to be octroyed. It's not human, because we are from nature different, we have different ideas, we have different ambitions, we have also different wishes how much we work, and therefore it needs a certain totalitarian system to achieve that. The main target of a prospering economy should be to eliminate poverty and not to create equality. Because equality will finally mean poverty of everybody or misery of everybody, as the Soviets successfully proved. The way to the planned economy is also prepared by this other phenomenon. And I'm coming back to moralizing. And this has become an important weapon. And we have seen there tools to discriminate certain behaviors and force and guide certain other ones. We have, for instance, this, I'm very much for sustainability. And that you have it, but you should be capitalize sustainability, you should think long-term, etc. But the sustainability discussion has been distorted to some sort of moral thing, which are defined by different pressure group, what is sustainable, what is not sustainable. It can also limit the investment spectrum. For instance, we need oil and gas. We need oil and gas. Now, it has become, for certain banks, it has become difficult to finance exploration. We need it because it might be bad for the reputation. And it is this question, which I see also in the financial business, that we see certain things which are legal, and then there are certain things which are now defined and they say it's legitimate. And the question is, who defines what is legitimate? And there are different groups working on that and making a huge pressure on that. A very field where they move around is the issue, for instance, if you look at the relation of climate. Certainly ecology And the clean environment should be a concern for everybody. And it is necessary to have certain rules and protect air and water. But this area is now dominated by emotional para-religions, which all allows also very strong guiding in infrastructure and economy without necessarily allowing a clear scientific debate. When the energy regulations in Germany and the so-called Energiewende, is a typical example of a politically and populist misguided situation. Eventually, the German industry will pay for that. A very big role in this are playing the non-governmental organizations who work very successfully based on organized fear. The climate change, whatever you see there. I think we have to have try to have clean air, clean water, but it has to be. But the issue of climate should be done on a more scientific basis. Business, in view of the strong position of NGOs and other groups, is now not only limited by regulations of national, supranational, and global authorities or bodies, but also by practices which are considered either legitimate or illegitimate by pressure groups. Administrations tend to be close with such groups, because it's also a political factor, and also media, in order to leash the market. The legal system does not allow certain interventionist measures. Even government bodies use these possibilities and use also what they call now the name and shame lists. This leads us to a system of a planned economy, and which will hopefully not go as far as the old Soviet system, but it's a system of planned economy which is a lot more complex. Certainly certain planning is necessary, for instance, for infrastructure, traffic, and energy, but it should not be a manipulation of the economy. It should not be intervention and not be the new popular word of nudging. Nudging is a word that means telling something is good and the other thing is bad. Nudging sounds very nice because it appears to be the carrot and not the stick. But it is also an intervention and not complying with the only carrot, because nudging has still the stick of the name and shame. So the question is now the planned economy our destiny with all these things? The train is going in this direction. Fortunately, it's going very strong in that direction. And I think it is a role now of the conservatives and the liberals to fight that, to fight for a free society. And there we come already in our semantic traps. What is a liberal? The US is what we call here socialist. Then we talk about social liberals. I think they are neither liberals nor social, but they are something like that. Conservatives, what is that? Now an old communist is called a conservative. We are already in this semantic traps. But I think we have also, as liberals, we have to think about something. I think we are sometimes not united enough, and sometimes like to debate on little differences. And we also do a lot of things which are more intellectual than being used towards the public. We have to expose ourselves a lot more to the public, giving very simple messages. Certainly it's much easier if you have a clear ideology, you have a clear line, and you can do it. We don't have a clear ideology, but we can give clear and short messages. And I think we should use certain means. And I think like the European Resource Bank, working a lot also with universities, with students. Also the roadshow, which Barbara is doing every year, I think in 30 towns of Europe, is very good because it also addresses young people. But I think instead of publishing too many books, which are then not necessarily being read by enough things, we should go out. We should go to the social media. And I think, for instance, what we can do here is, for instance, signing now the petitions which we are giving on the issues of the IP protection and the digital tax. I think these are the things which we should do. And we can give this message. Market economies, entrepreneurship and competition have brought us an unprecedented progress and brought a broad share of humanity out of poverty and hunger over the last 30 years. Interventionism in the monetary, fiscal, and economic systems caused the larger economic crisis of the last 30 years as well. But this lesson is ignored. We continue the path of limiting freedom, lack of trust, more control, and go into a system of a strongly planned and guided economy. And what is even worse, the next dangerous step might then follow, not only the planned and guided economy, but the planned and guided citizen. I would have liked to give you a better, more optimistic thing, but I'm very concerned, but we can still do something. And please, I think this is our mission now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prince Michael. Your Serene Highness, are you willing to take some questions?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Questions? Are you already planned citizen?
Do you view, I guess, politicians like Orban as allies or enemies or a mix? And of course, we would apply sort of the same analysis somewhat to Trump in the United States. How do we either work with the things we like or stop the things we don't like with those the types of lawmakers?
I think as liberals, we should look at the facts and of reality of politics. And I think if we talk about Prime Minister Orban, he sees his vocation primarily Hungarian, and he sees the European Union as actually a useful organization to provide a larger market and internal market. But he does not want to lose the Hungarian identity in an overall idea of harmonization. And now we have to see where are now the priorities. And the politicians, we have also to understand, they have a different, they're not only seeing the economy, they have also to see other priorities. I would like also to have Prime Minister Orban to be also economically maybe more liberal. But I don't think he's in the economy. He is less liberal than the German government, or certainly he's more liberal than the French government. So I think we have to see, you can't be, as a politician, you have to make compromise. You will never be, if you're a head of a government, 100% liberal. But you should go as far as possible.
Thank you. Daniel, next.
Thank you. That of course triggers the next question in my mind. We talk a lot of economic liberties, but I have a slightly different opinion in Hungary in that respect. But especially looking at Hungary, where do you see, and especially Prime Minister Orban or other gentlemen of that caliber, the trade-off between economic and civic liberties? Because let's be honest, without civic liberties, economic liberties cannot exist.
I agree with that, and I'm very much a proposer of civil liberty. I'm only afraid, and I don't want now to put excuses, but I think we have, under the word of political correctness, etc., we have, I think, as much limitation of civil liberties now in other countries than there might be in Hungary on otherwise. I'm not a specialist in civil liberties. I'm very much for civil liberties. I don't know how much or how much worse the guiding of the media is in Hungary than maybe in other countries, which other one. But I agree, we need civil liberties and we need economic liberties.
Next question, please.
Thank you. There are two words that are very fashionable today among economists and more or less among certain economists, those coming from the left wing. And these two words, which are frequently used interchangeably, which is not in their nature, are inequality and poverty. For me, poverty belongs to the economics of development. Inequality belongs to the economics of envy. I think we should decide which is our greatest fight, for development or for satisfying envy. This is one point. The second point is everybody looks to the market, points the fingers to the market, which is guilty of harnessing inequalities. But I give you three commonsensical examples which are not featuring in any economic textbooks, at least in those mainstream economic textbooks, in which government is obviously guilty of inequalities. The first one is inflation. Inflation is a mechanism which redistributes wealth with respect to the purchasing power of money. Inflation makes the richest richer and the poorest poorer. I have no evidence that the things might stay otherwise. The second is taxation. Taxation, before being a tool for redistributing wealth from the rich to the poor, have very dangerous effects on the behavior of people, making the poorer people lazy and making the richest very unsolidar with the poor, because they see that a state takes wealth for them against their will. So solidarity is out of the question, because it's an offshoot of freedom. And the last one is regulation. Regulation increases costs among the members of society in an unequal manner. Some could bear the cost of regulation easier than others. So here is another point in which inequality is nourished by government. How could we make sense in the problem of inequality on which is the most guilty from these two characters, fiction characters, government and markets, and clear once and for all the minds of people in this respect?
Well, I fully agree with you, and I think we have to try to, because envy is a very strong political factor, and it is very much used, and I think it will be very difficult to take away this tool. I think the only way we can put in good examples and good arguments against it. And having the argument, it's important to take people out of, because actually for us it's very logical. We prefer not to have poor people, and there might be people who are well off and people who are very well off. But that is better than having a whole group of people who are equal but living in not so good condition. And you know, we have the laboratory experiment was done in Germany with the German Democratic Republic and the Federal Republic. We had over 40 years an ideal laboratory experiment which happened there and which proved that actually inequality brings more people out of poverty than equality. But it's very difficult. And this will be one of our very important parts of the debate to get it through. But it is difficult. And even so-called conservative and liberal politicians are talking about inequality, etc. And I think even they don't know what they talk about.
Hi, thank you. I was very glad to hear you talking about naming and shaming and nudging and the problems that those pose. And over time, I've become increasingly concerned about the power of the left in this regard, facing major corporations and what seems to me to be an increasing cowardice on the part of corporations in the face of shareholder activism, to the degree that in many cases they actually have begun to operate contrary to their own fiduciary self-interest, which creates fundamental problems for a liberal who's opposed to state intervention. And I wanted to ask your advice about what a liberal opposed to state intervention is to do in the face of these kind of threats that are causing so much damage.
I think what we have to have, and we have it, but we have to have really the courage to speak out and to make it in very sort of, the French have a wonderful word which means on a text, vulgariser. That means making it easily understandable for people, getting very easy words of doing it and explaining it. But in certain things, it's very difficult. For instance, to explain the complexity of the energy matters. It's difficult, and it has been sinking very much in the heads. Or, for instance, in Europe, the discussion was on the European Ministry of Economy. People says if you have one currency, you need also to have one Ministry of Economy and a guided economy from one place. If we ask the people, why is it needed? You get the answer, everybody knows. And this is the danger. It's very difficult to fight against everybody knows. And then one has to have very simple things on complex matters. But I think one can find simply in the energy, let's just take out the energy and let's just out this economy thing. One can find some good, simple examples where it shows that this argumentation doesn't work. But it's a long way. It is a long way. If something is set into the heads of the people, it's a long way to get rid of that.
Anders, and then the next Swede. Anders first, and then. Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah, I think in Sweden, a lot of liberals. They are more concerned about inequality than poverty today. And I think this is a really severe problem in some way. I ask you as economist or investor, do you think that the low interest rates and the free money, the printed money and the policies of ECB, isn't that a result of the high asset prices? Is that perhaps the discussion about the inequality, a result of high asset prices actually constructed by politicians? So there is some sort of, could there be an agenda behind it, or is it just a false politics, or what? And it's also a temporary problem, perhaps, or problem, but it's the high asset prices.
I think there are two things. First, yes, the cheap money and the resulting high asset prices have contributed that the figures of inequality have become much bigger, because simply assets are overvalued. They will go down again. The second thing is that when you are living in a relatively prosperous society, like in Sweden, it is easy to talk about inequality and being less concerned than poverty. And it would be good if the whole world would have this system, but it's not yet. But I think we really have, and you can fall from prosperity pretty quickly back into poverty.
I agree. Thanks.
Next question there, and then the last question by Stephen.
Thank you, Prince Michael. I was very taken by the fact that you moved from talking about economics to talking about PC and wider political issues. It seems to me that there's a much more fundamental attack on Western ideology that comes through what Jordan Peterson described as postmodern neo-Marxist thinking, which is coming out of the universities and into politics. Then there's an attack upon. We touched upon equality, and equality is being redefined as equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity, which I think is something that's classical liberals we would all sign up to. There's a moral relativism. There's an attack upon objective truth, and I just wonder whether the level that we're approaching it on, if we talk just about the economic arguments, we're sort of missing a more fundamental attack upon the whole of the Enlightenment thinking.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because this is, if you look at Marxism, it was not only an economic theory, it was sort of a general society theory. And we have gone actually also in Western society a quite long way towards Marxism, without that we are really realizing it. And I think we can't talk just about the economic side. We also have to look about the problem of society and politics.
Okay, it's not a question, but a comment that the next level of control is controlling the human being, and if you do that, you can bypass all the governmental regulations. And the technique is already there. As a Swedish company can put a little chip in between your thumb and your forefinger on both hands or one hand, and with that eliminates all the need of credit cards and passports and everything else. And they will know, of course, where you are all the time. And this technique is already existing, and the next step, the digital revolution 4, is to control the human being. And there are people who think we should put in a little chip so you don't like to eat meat anymore. And this is a prolongation of the whole climate thing. Some of the people in that sphere are thinking of these things. A new human being or a better human being, that might be the next step. And I think at a forthcoming seminar like this, it might be interesting to have someone look at this and see where are we actually heading beyond government control into people control, human being control.
Thank you, Stephen. We'll pick it up.
Thank you. Just to pick up from there, I think this is a very dangerous thing, because also with these tendencies, we try again to create a better human being. And every movement so far we had to create a better human being was ending in totalitarian system, in lack of freedom, and in basically in disaster. And we see it, for instance, in China now. They have the social control which they introduce. And I'm afraid that we might, on a maybe not less direct way, we are also going in towards these tendencies, as you said. Maybe I can say something last. I think I didn't answer very well your questions towards Prime Minister Orban. And I want to come back. And I would say, if the rest of Europe would also respect enough the rule of law and the rule of human freedom, they could throw the first stone. But I don't see anybody really legitimized to throw the first stone.
Well, thank you very much, Your Serene Highness. I think there's a round of applause. Thank you.
Danke.
Thank you. Thank you.